For the last 7 years, my life had been nothing but survival boot camp on the cracked sidewalks and park benches just outside Willow Creek Estates. I learned which overpasses offered the driest sleep, which gas station bathrooms had the warmest hand dryers, and how to shrink myself into a shadow so the cops wouldn't notice another undesirable haunting the edges of paradise. Paradise, of course, being the cookie-cutter kingdom my own parents ruled with an iron clipboard and a smile sharper than their manicured lawns. It all started on my 16th birthday. Karen and Richard Davis, Mom the almighty HOA president, Dad her loyal second-in-command, had decided I no longer matched the family brand. Willow Creek Estates demanded perfection, grass exactly 3 inches, shutters approved beige number 472, no bird feeders because they attract undesirables, and definitely no daughters who wrote poetry instead of pom-poms. I was the glitch in their perfect HOA spreadsheet. So they packed my entire childhood into 2 black trash bags, drove me to the county line, and dropped me with $100 and Dad's cold verdict. You're a disappointment. Aurora, you're no longer our problem. The story they told the neighborhood was that I was rebellious and out of control. The truth was simpler and uglier. They were social climbers who needed a cheerleader debutante, not a quiet girl who painted murals on her bedroom wall and dared to question why every house had to look like it was cloned in a factory. They erased me the same way they issued violation notices, swift, merciless, and with zero appeal. There was only one person in that entire sterile suburb who refused to let me vanish. My godmother, Miss Evelyn Reed, lived in the grandest house on Maple Lane, a white-column mansion the rest of the HOA both envied and feared. She was old money, fragile heart, and the only adult who had ever looked at me like I mattered. But Karen had made sure Evelyn couldn't take me in. If you shelter that bad influence, Mom had hissed over tea one afternoon, we'll cut off every social tie you have in this community. No more garden club, no more charity galas, and certainly no more goddaughter. So our relationship became a covert operation. Once a month, her driver would pick me up for whatever shelter I was crashing in and deliver me to a neutral cafe 2 towns over. Evelyn would slide me a $100 bill she couldn't really spare, ask about my poems, and remind me I was still somebody's daughter, even if my real parents had traded me for HOA approval ratings. Those stolen hours were the only warmth in 7 years of concrete pillows and hunger that gnawed louder than any fine. Then the obituary appeared in the local paper, printed right between the HOA meeting minutes and the weekly violation list. Miss Evelyn Reed, beloved resident of Willow Creek Estates, passed peacefully. I read it in a public library. The fluorescent lights buzzing like the HOA security cameras that once followed me everywhere. I didn't attend the funeral. I knew Karen would be there in her black designer dress, playing the grieving best friend while clutching the microphone at the podium to remind everyone how community standards had to be upheld even in mourning. A week later, a man in an expensive suit showed up at the shelter. Mr. Chun, estate attorney. He handed me a crisp envelope and said the words I never thought I'd hear. I was named primary beneficiary in Evelyn's will. I laughed a short, bitter bark that made the shelter dogs tilt their heads. A joke, right? My parents had already stolen my future. Why not one last prank from beyond the grave? But something stubborn inside me, the same part that had survived 7 winters in a hoodie, made me go. I walked into the law office wearing the only clean outfit I owned, secondhand jeans and a faded sweater. The waiting room smelled of lemon polish and money. Karen and Richard were already seated in plush leather chairs, looking like they just stepped off a yacht. When they saw me, their faces did something interesting. First blank shock, then a slow, possessive rage that twisted their perfect smiles into something feral. Karen recovered first. Of course. She always did. What is she doing here? She demanded, voice dripping that fake honey she used at every HOA meeting. This is a family matter. Mr. Chun. The girl has been a vagrant for 7 years. She has no claim. Mr. Chun didn't blink. Miss Reed was very specific. Aurora is to be present. He gestured for us to sit and began the dry legal preamble. A few small bequests to charities. Then the hammer, the entirety of my remaining estate, including the Maple Lane residence, investments, and liquid assets totaling over $10 million. I leave to my beloved goddaughter, Aurora Davis. The room detonated. Karen's theatrical gasp could have won an Oscar. This is outrageous. We cared for Evelyn in her final years. We managed her affairs. We were her family. She finally deigned to look at me. Eyes narrowed to slits. This person has contributed nothing but embarrassment to our community. I just stood there, hands clasped, absorbing their venom like I'd absorbed every $500 fine they'd ever slapped on my old garage mural. I was used to it. 7 years of rain and rejection had armored me. They thought this was about money. They had no idea it was about the truth finally crawling out of the grave they thought they'd buried it in. Mr. Chun allowed himself the tiniest smile. If you're quite finished, we can proceed with Miss Reed's personal video testament. He picked up the remote. The screen flickered to life. And there she was, Evelyn, wrapped in her cashmere throw, eyes sharp as ever. Karen shifted in her chair like the leather had suddenly turned to nails. She had expected legalese. She was about to get a reckoning. Hello, Karen. Hello, Richard. Evelyn's voice filled the room, warm but edged with steel. If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you're here expecting your reward for all those years of friendship. She leaned forward, and it felt like she was staring straight through the screen at me. And hello, my dearest Aurora. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. But I have one final gift, the truth. Karen's manicured fingers tightened on her designer purse until the leather creaked. Richard's face had gone the color of old oatmeal. This wasn't the polite reading they'd rehearsed in their heads on the drive over. This was a ghost with receipts. Evelyn continued, voice calm, but carrying the weight of every secret she'd kept. Let's talk about the trust one established for Aurora on the day she was born. $100,000, meant for her education and her future home in Willow Creek Estates. She lifted a stack of papers. Bank statements, withdrawal slips, all of them bearing Karen's looping signature and Richard's blocky one. The documents slid onto the screen beside her like evidence in a courtroom drama. I have the complete records, Evelyn said, and the quiet fury in her tone made the air feel thinner. Over 10 years of systematic withdrawals. Withdrawals that paid for your country club memberships, your second luxury SUV, those European vacations you posted about while claiming you were managing my care. You didn't just fail your daughter. You stole from her to fund the very image you used to destroy her. Karen's whisper cut through the silence like a snapped HOA rule. She's lying. The old woman was senile, but the signatures on the screen didn't lie. They screamed. Evelyn's expression softened into something almost pitying. And then, when Aurora turned 16 and the money was gone, when she started asking questions about the college fund that had mysteriously vanished, you did something even more monstrous. You couldn't face the consequences of your greed, so you manufactured a crisis. You called her rebellious. You called her a bad influence on the community. And you threw your own child out onto the street to cover up your pathetic little crime. I glanced at my parents. Karen's perfect lipstick had smeared. Richard was gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. The video kept rolling. Relentless. Evelyn detailed every absurd fine they had weaponized against me after the trust ran dry. $2.50 for the garden gnome. I painted teal instead of approved beige. $500 for the mural on my garage that disrupted neighborhood uniformity Another $300 because my wind chimes allegedly disturbed the aesthetic harmony. She even had copies of the violation notices, each one signed by Karen as president. The black humor of it hit me like a slap and a laugh at the same time. Here they were, the couple who once fined Mrs. Patterson across the street for hanging Christmas lights 2 days early, now exposed as the biggest thieves in Willow Creek Estates. Karen had spent years preaching community standards while picking my future clean. Evelyn took a slow breath. My last will is not just a distribution of assets. It is justice. It is the scales finally balanced after 20 years of lies. She looked straight into the camera again, voice softening for me. To my brave goddaughter, Aurora, I leave everything, the house, the investments, the charitable foundation I built in secret. It is not charity. It is restoration. The future they stole, return 100-fold. Use it to build something real. Then her gaze hardened, swinging back to my parents. And for my so-called lifelong friends Karen and Richard, I have left you a choice. In the video, she tapped a thick manila folder on her lap. In the real world, mister. Chin opened his briefcase and placed an identical folder on the polished table between them. Inside, Evelyn said, is every document, every bank record, every affidavit from the private investigator I hired 5 years ago. It is a complete, prosecutable case for felony embezzlement. Karen made a small, strangled sound, the same noise she once made when a resident dared to plant unauthorized tulips. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish yanked onto the HOA dock. You have 2 options, Evelyn continued, voice now cold as a midnight fine. Option 1. Sign the full confession my lawyer has prepared. Renounce any claim to my estate. Release any future claim on Aurora's assets. And in this room, right now, give your daughter the apology you have owed her for 7 years of hell. Do this, and the evidence stays sealed forever. She paused, letting the mercy hang like a guillotine. Option 2. Refuse. Cling to your pride. My lawyer will walk this folder straight to the district attorney. You will be charged. You will be prosecuted. And I promise you, both of you will go to prison. The screen went black. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the expensive wall clock ticking like a countdown. Mr. Chun slid the confession papers and a fountain pen across the table. You have 1 hour, he said quietly. Karen's mask finally cracked. She turned on Richard with a hiss that would have earned her a violation for disturbing the peace. This is your fault. You were the one who insisted on the new boat. He snarled back. You were the one who needed the bigger house to impress the garden club. Their perfect partnership of greed and HOA tyranny dissolved into a pathetic blame fest right there in the leather chairs. I watched them unravel and felt nothing but a strange, hollow amusement. 7 years of sleeping in shelters. And here they were fighting over who got to keep the yacht they bought with my stolen future. I stood up. The hard chair had left creases in my jeans, but my spine felt straighter than it had in years. You know what the worst part is? I said, voice low but carrying across the sudden quiet. It wasn't the money. It was the 7 years. The 7 years you stole from me and from her. I nodded toward the dark screen where Evelyn's face had just vanished. You didn't just rob me of a college fund. You robbed me of time with the only person who ever saw me. And that is something I will never forgive. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them to their ugly little civil war. Behind me, I heard Karen's voice rise into the shrill register she usually reserved for residents who park their trash cans 2 inches too far from the curb. We are not signing anything until we speak to our attorney. Richard was already dialing on his phone, muttering about undue influence and senile old woman. Mr. Chin simply tapped his watch. The hour was ticking. I stepped outside into the bright afternoon and let the sun hit my face for the first time without looking over my shoulder for an HOA patrol card. The weight that had sat on my chest since I was 16 felt suddenly lighter, like someone had finally lifted the invisible lien Karen had placed on my entire life. The call came later that same day. Mr. Chin's voice was professionally calm, but carried a note of quiet satisfaction. Ms. Davis, your parents have made their decision. They signed a confession. The evidence regarding the embezzlement is now permanently sealed. The estate, house, accounts, foundation is officially yours. I swallowed. Did they say anything? A foolish part of me still hoped for one cracked syllable of real remorse. There was a pause. They did not. They signed, gathered their things, and left. The apology portion of the document remains unsigned. Of course, even facing prison, Karen couldn't bring herself to say the words. A few days later, a stiff, lawyer-drafted letter arrived at the shelter. It was full of phrases like regret for any perceived misunderstandings and desire for an amicable resolution. Not an apology, a surrender. The last I would ever hear from them. The weeks that followed felt like waking up inside someone else's dream. Bankers who once would have crossed the street to avoid me now called me ma'am and offered espresso. Investment managers slid across mahogany desks thick folders labeled, "Your new portfolio." I kept waiting for the catch, for some HOA fine to appear on letterhead demanding I restore the aesthetic of my new life. None came. My first act wasn't buying a flashy car or a penthouse. It was walking back into Willow Creek Estates, not as the banished daughter, but as the new owner of Evelyn's mansion on Maple Lane, the same street where Karen had once driven her golf cart like a dictator on wheels. Neighbors peeked from behind their regulation curtains, whispering. I could almost hear the group chat notifications pinging. She's back. What do we do? I did nothing dramatic at first. I simply sat on Evelyn's wide front porch, the one with the forbidden wicker rocking chair she had kept anyway, and read her journals. Page after page of quiet rebellion. She had funded scholarships for kids who didn't fit the HOA mold. She had anonymously paid fines for single moms who couldn't afford the proper landscaping. She had been fighting the same invisible war I had, only from inside the gates. And then I found the foundation documents. Evelyn's private charity, quietly established years ago, dedicated to helping forgotten youth and residents crushed by overreaching associations. The same foundation my parents had tried to wrestle away from me in the will reading. Now it was mine to run. I started small. I hired a lawyer, not Mr. Chun, but a shark who specialized in HOA disputes, and began quietly challenging the most ridiculous rules. The bird feeder ban was the first to fall, then the paint color monopoly. Residents who had lived in fear of Karen's clipboard started leaving cautious notes in my mailbox. Thank you. Finally. How did you do it? But the real work was still ahead. I wanted to turn Evelyn's house into something bigger than one woman's revenge. I wanted it to become Evelyn's house, a safe haven for kids who had been thrown away by parents more obsessed with curb appeal than their own children. A place with warm beds, hot meals, art supplies instead of rule books, and zero fines for being yourself. The groundbreaking ceremony was set for the old side yard where I once got ticketed for planting sunflowers. I stood under a crisp white tent, the same kind Karen used for her annual community appreciation luncheons, and looked out at the small crowd. City officials who had once ignored my existence now shook my hand. A few former neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid me when I was the homeless girl now smiled nervously. And in the front row sat a handful of teenagers who reminded me so much of my 16-year-old self. Hoodies, sketchbooks, defiant eyes that my throat tightened. Karen and Richard were nowhere to be seen. Rumor was they had quietly sold their house and moved to a gated community 2 states away, one with even stricter rules. I hoped they were happy measuring their new grass to the millimeter. As the ceremony ended and the first residents of Evelyn's house began moving in. I took a quiet walk through the old neighborhood. The lawns were still perfect, the shutters still the exact approved shade. But something had shifted. A house 2 doors down now flew a small rainbow flag, something that would have earned an immediate violation notice under Karen's reign. The elderly couple on the corner had planted wildflowers instead of the regulation annuals. Little rebellions, tiny cracks in the beige empire. I stopped in front of my childhood home, the one Karen and Richard had sold the week after the will reading. A new family lived there now. Young parents with a toddler who was already drawing chalk pictures on the driveway. No one had found them yet. I smiled at the sight. Maybe the virus of freedom was spreading. That night, I sat at Evelyn's old desk, now mine, and opened the last journal she had written before she passed. The final entry was addressed to me. My darling girl, if you're reading this, you won. Not because you have the money, but because you never let them make you small. Use what I've given you to make sure no other child ever feels invisible in their own home. I closed the book and looked out the window at the dark street. Somewhere out there, kids were still sleeping in cars because their parents cared more about neighborhood aesthetics than their own blood. I had the tools now, the foundation, the house, the money, and more importantly, I had the blueprint, turn pain into promise. The first major project was already in motion. We broke ground on a second building behind the main house, a creative arts center for at-risk youth. No dress code, no rule book, just space to paint, write, and be loud. The city had fast-tracked the permits once they realized the donor was the same woman who had quietly dismantled half the HOA's petty ordinances. I started getting emails from people across the country. I saw your story on the local news. My HOA is doing the same thing to my son. I answered every single one. Some got legal referrals. Some got scholarship checks from the foundation. A few got invitations to come stay at Evelyn's house while they figure out their next step. The shelter I had once called home now had a waiting list of donors instead of residents. One afternoon, a reporter from the city paper showed up on the porch. She wanted the full story behind the dramatic will reading. I gave her the sanitized version, the one that didn't include my parents' names, because even after everything, I still didn't want to drag their shame across the front page. But I did make sure to say the words Evelyn would have loved. No child should ever be thrown away because they don't match the neighborhood palette. The article ran with the headline, "Local Heiress Turns Former HOA Battlefield into Youth Sanctuary." Karen probably choked on her morning coffee wherever she was hiding. I clipped it and pinned it to the bulletin board in the new art center, right next to the first painting done by a 14-year-old girl who had been fined out of her own home for excessive window displays. The girl told me the painting was called Freedom Beige. We both laughed until we cried. Months passed. The foundation grew. I learned how to read balance sheets the way I once learned which dumpsters had the freshest bread. I hired staff who actually cared instead of enforcing rules. And every night, I walked the halls of Evelyn's house listening to the soft sounds of sleeping kids who no longer had to worry about being a disappointment to anyone. One evening, I received a single white envelope with no return address. Inside was a short note in Karen's handwriting, the first real words I had seen from her since the lawyer's office. It wasn't an apology. It was 3 sentences. We made mistakes. We hope you're well. Please don't contact us. I stared at it for a long time, then folded it neatly and filed it under closed cases. Some closures don't come with hugs. They come with silence and the knowledge that the people who tried to erase you finally have to live with the empty space they created. It's been a full year now. I'm standing on the stage at the grand opening of the second Evelyn's house location. This one across town in a neighborhood still fighting its own HOA battles. The building is bright, modern, full of light and laughter instead of violation stickers. Warm beds, a kitchen that never runs out of food, a library stacked with poetry books instead of rule books, and a wall of murals painted by the kids themselves. No approval committee required. The crowd is bigger than I expected. City council members, donors, and a surprising number of former Willow Creek residents who quietly slipped away from Karen's grip over the last 12 months. I look out at their faces and realize something profound. The woman who once slept on park benches is now the one building the benches. The girl who was called worthless is now the one giving worth back to others. I think about my parents for the first time in months. Not with anger, but with the same distant sadness I felt in that law office. They chose their perfect image over their daughter. They chose fines over family. And in the end, the only thing they got to keep was their shame. Evelyn didn't just leave me money. She left me her faith. She saw the strength in a girl the world had tried to make invisible. And she gave that girl the tools to become visible for everyone else. My worth was never in a bank account or a beige house. It was forged in cold nights and quiet defiance. And now it's being used to light the way for kids who are still walking the same dark road I once did. After the speeches, I walked through the new facility with a 16-year-old boy who arrived last week. He's holding a sketchbook, eyes wide at the art studio that has no approved color palette. So I can really draw whatever I want? He asks, voice tentative. I smile, the same smile Evelyn used to give me in those secret cafe meetings. Whatever you want. And if anyone tries to fine you for it, send them to me. He laughs, and the sound is brighter than any HOA perfect sunset. Later, alone on the porch of the original Maple Lane house, I open the last journal page Evelyn ever wrote. The very final line reads, "Tell Aurora the scales are balanced now. Go build the world they tried to deny you." I close the book and look out at the neighborhood that once tried to erase me. The lawns are still green. The houses still stand in their perfect rows. But somewhere inside those walls, kids are dreaming bigger dreams. Parents are questioning old rules. And a quiet revolution is blooming. One sunflower, one poem, one act of defiance at a time. The girl they threw away came back. Not to burn the kingdom down, but to build something better inside it. And that, more than any inheritance, is the real fortune Evelyn left me. An absolutely incredible journey from HOA exile to hope. What do you think? Should every neighborhood Karen get a video like this? Drop your thoughts below. Smash that like button if you're tired of petty rules. And subscribe for more stories where the underdog finally wins. See you in the next one.